For the fifth consecutive year, 68% of Americans support organized labor, the highest rate since the 1950s and 60s. This support crosses party lines with independents, Democrats, and even fewer than half of Republicans backing unions. Yet only 13% of all employed adults belong to a union, the same number since 2001. Out of the 14.3 million people who belong to a labor organization, almost 30% of them live in just two states, California and New York. We're watching in real time as the wealth gap grows and as New Deal-era worker protections unravel, all while global and domestic events spark outrage. So why is there a disconnect between the strong support for organized labor, the rise in inequality, and the weakening of worker power? Why does the working class not have the strength to challenge the rule of the oligarchs or the military-industrial complex? The reality is, the American labor movement has become the administrative arm of capitalist imperialist expansion. For many people, the concept of a union evokes images of strength, justice, and protection. It represents the dignity of work and the hope of achieving a comfortable middle-class life. However, the reality is that organizing a union has been intentionally made difficult. Even after a workplace is organized, some workers may feel disillusioned by the lack of power and the bureaucracy that can accompany their union. This discontent highlights a little-known aspect of the labor movement, the distinction between class struggle unionism and business unionism. Earlier this year, I attended a conference for my labor organization, which included contractors and owners. Standing at the podium was the owner of a submarine manufacturing company. For roughly 30 minutes, he shamelessly promoted his book about his experience in the Navy during the Cold War. He espoused the myth of spreading democracy against the horrors of communism and shared stories about eliminating the enemy, referring to the act of taking other human lives. He proudly declared that every new hire at his company received not only a copy of his book, but also a book on basic economics, so his employees can too become entrepreneurs. As I looked around the conference, I noticed many attendees nodding along, inspired by the combination of heroic patriotism and rugged capitalist individualism. Needless to say, as an anarchist, I felt somewhat out of place. But the real excitement came with the announcement of new military contracts and the expansion of war fleets, which means more jobs and an increase to membership. This is an example of business unionism in action. Others might call it class collaboration. Business unionism operates on a hierarchical corporate capitalist model. In this framework, the labor organization serves as an intermediary between the owners and the workers. The owners seek minimal disruption, so they negotiate a bureaucratic contract that outlines the procedures for resolving disputes. As a result, workers receive an agreed-upon wage and representation in the event of a grievance. So what's the problem with this arrangement? There are several issues. The most apparent is that a living wage often comes at the expense of military imperialism directed against others. In stark contrast, in the 1900s, class struggle unions like the IWW and unionists like Eugene Debs, Mother Jones, and Lucy Parsons staunchly opposed U.S. military intervention, and many went to prison for that opposition under the Espionage Act, despite First Amendment rights. Others like Emma Goldman and Alexander Berkman, along with hundreds of so-called radical aliens, were deported during the Palmer raids for their activism against World War I, arguing that the war was an imperialist venture that benefited capitalists at the expense of workers. Labor organizations were created in response to the complex social and material conditions faced by workers during an era of unregulated industrial capitalism. They provided a voice for those who had none before. For individuals who rely on wage labor to survive and lack alternative means to affect social change, the last resort is to come together in solidarity and withhold our labor. Unions fundamentally represent a struggle between social classes. For business unionists, the contract is the primary concern. In this view, Western hegemony and weapons manufacturing are beneficial to business. And this isn't to suggest that workers don't matter, but rather that they are regarded as individuals within the organization rather than as a collective class. The chaos caused by their production elsewhere is generally of no concern, and often the workers themselves remain unaware of the ramifications that our labor creates. This is especially true in the building trades. Recently, the Valero refinery in my area announced that it would shut down, sparking outrage. Many workers quickly blamed California's emission policies, claiming that these regulations made it difficult for the refinery to operate. I'm not here to defend those policies. In my opinion, they represent an attempt at liberalism, trying to address the issues caused by capitalism through taxation and more capitalism. However, something very significant happened just before the Valero plant decided to close. In 2024, the refinery was fined $82 million for knowingly releasing an estimated 8,400 tons of material containing benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylene compounds directly into the community, all of which are known to cause cancer and reproductive harm. This issue had been ongoing since 2003, but that same year, Valero reported a net income of $1.1 billion attributable to its stockholders. The $82 million fine for over a decade of negligence towards working class communities hardly makes a dent in the company's one-year profits. Despite this, workers continue to advocate for Valero. Additionally, there are other refineries in the area, such as Chevron, which have faced allegations of human rights violations in Nigeria and Myanmar. Chevron has also benefited from the crude oil resulting from the Iraq War and the energy supply that contributes to the genocide ongoing in Gaza. These are all matters that most average workers would not willingly support, yet they still defend these corporate owners time and again. The issue at hand is structural and directly contributes to the labor movement's current weakness. I know this might sound obvious, but it highlights the fundamental truth of our economic system. We live in an environment where survival depends on exchanging the money provided by the owning class for the basic means of living. In short, America functions like a giant company store. Long ago, a company would own the housing and the stores that provided food and clothing. Employees could only use company money or credit from their wages to purchase necessities. This monopolistic arrangement effectively funneled salaries back to the employer, creating a system of debt slavery. Today, while we may not have a single monopolistic owner, our system is still monopolistic in nature. Our choice is either capitalism or capitalism. There are few real alternatives for communal self-sustainability accessible that do not contribute to ecological destruction or imperialism, especially when land and resources are privately owned. Consequently, we are utterly reliant on the wage system to survive. In this way, workers often view the owning class as the hand that feeds them, and that relationship is upheld under the threat of poverty. Ultimately, we remain compliant and complicit in this system because we lack viable alternatives. At one point in US history, the outrageous nature of the systems of production made unions necessary. However, today, many unions have become corporatized and structured in ways that mirror the same conglomerates that both oppress them and undermine them. In his book, The New Men of Power, C. Wright Mills examined the labor leaders of the 1940s and the reasons behind the shift away from the fight for workers' liberation towards the acceptance of a compliant working class. Mills emphasized the psychological dynamics that emerged when blue-collar workers ascended to prominent positions and found themselves negotiating with wealthy, college-educated industry leaders. Within this power dynamic, there was a tendency for leaders to imitate and project a persona of legitimacy. As Mother Jones wrote, "Never in the early days of the labor struggle would you find leaders wining and dining with the aristocracy, nor did their wives strut about like diamond-bedecked peacocks, nor were they attended by humiliated, cringing colored servants. The rank and file have let their servants become their masters and dictators. The workers have now to fight not alone their exploiters, but likewise their own leaders who often betray them, who sell them out, who put their own advancement ahead of that of the working masses, who make the rank and file their political pawns." The sentiment was further intensified by the expulsion of leftists from labor organizations during McCarthyism and the Cold War. In reality, silencing leftist voices was a strategy used by our labor leaders to maintain their power and ensure a compliant workforce. Mills writes, "The fight waged against communists by labor leaders may thus serve several purposes at once. It makes them feel better ideologically. It is an attempt to kill off troublesome factions within their unions. It strengthens their relations with the federal administration. It improves negotiation chances with business. And at least as a safeguard, if not an outright help in their general public relations, it may ease resistance to their organizing efforts." This marked the end of class struggle unionism and solidified the liberalization of the labor movement. Modern labor organizations do not challenge the structures of imperialism, exploitation, and neo-colonialism. Instead, they seek a share of the profit within the illusions of industrial democracy. This is why when a refinery pollutes a community with harmful chemicals or when the products of our labor contribute to atrocities, workers often defend the company in a strange display of Stockholm Syndrome. If there is to be change, it will demand a radical restructuring not only in how labor organizations operate, but also in the relationship workers have within their roles in the world. The rise of individualism and alienation dismantled worker solidarity, allowing business unionism to masquerade as change. On the smaller scale, understanding that an injury to one is an injury to all must be rebuilt. This is achieved through everyday relationships and acts of solidarity when a fellow worker is wronged, and shared struggles within all of those spaces. In this sense, every worker is an organizer. To return to Mills, no intelligent leftist thinks hours and wages are unimportant, but just as important and often more so are the detailed conditions of work, especially authority in the shop. The union becomes the means of a social revolution and the working life of the worker. It transforms his daily working existence. At a macro level, we must awaken to the reality that without our labor, the world would come to a halt. Profits, transportation, and global systems cannot function without workers. We collectively construct the framework that the oligarchs, billionaires, and tyrants exploit to oppress others. This can manifest in various ways, from divesting 401ks or pensions that support ongoing violence against marginalized groups, to direct actions like the dock workers in Europe who refuse to load weapons destined for genocide. It is important to remember that no single action will change the world, but each effort strengthens collective solidarity. The reality is that many labor organizations function to limit grassroots movements, turning workers into mere followers of labor leaders who issue directives. In top-down authoritarian union structures, grassroots causes are often suppressed, and workers are presented with a narrative dictating what they should support. This preserves the existing business structure by maintaining the status quo and ensuring that the workforce remains compliant with the owner's interests. While there are straightforward ways to counter this issue, they are frequently encountering as much resistance as the grassroots efforts themselves. Electing different individuals to offices of labor organizations will not resolve the underlying issues we face. No single person can be a solution to these problems. When people hold positions of power, their focus often shifts from serving others' best interests to maintaining the privileges that they enjoy. To restore labor organizations to their original purpose of promoting industrial democracy, we must dismantle the structures that create a permanent class of professional representatives. This can be achieved by amending a union's bylaws or constitution, implementing term limits, and delegating key decisions to rank-and-file committees rather than elected officials. The primary role of elected officials should be administrative, and each individual needs to be subject to recall. Many industrial unions have a surprising number of appointed officials. In top-down hierarchical union structures, these appointments can often lead to cliques and good old boy clubs, diverting the focus from serving the workers to navigating corporate structures aimed at personal advancement. In contrast, bottom-up structures allow unions to function autonomously, reducing the need for bureaucratic positions. Those positions that do remain should be filled through elections and subject to term limits. If you're looking to start reforming your union, I would recommend checking out organizations like Labor Notes or reading the book Democracy is Power: Rebuilding Unions from the Bottom Up. Labor Notes also offers a podcast and virtual seminars on various related topics. If you're interested in forming a union, I would consider exploring the Troublemaker's Handbook or the Secrets of a Successful Organizer. But before joining a union affiliated with the American Federation of Labor, it may be helpful to reach out to an independent union, like the Industrial Workers of the World. The situation we face should not be underestimated. All of these suggestions are simply a beginning to combat the injustices faced by working people everywhere. The structures of power we live in are not natural developments in the linear progress of society. They were explicitly designed to maintain decisions concentrated in the few. No single solution will work for everyone, but as you share in the struggle for basic decency, your strength and resolve will grow. That struggle and solidarity will serve as the basis for a new future in which we are not left with the choice between feeding ourselves and our loved ones by allowing our communities to be corporate dumping grounds, or paying for the necessities of life with blood money.